Austin, and I'm just here to say hi to everyone in Costa Rica and the couch, and thank you for chatting with me. Where does the inspiration to create soundtracks come from? That one's easy. It's the games themselves. So obviously all artists have influences from the work they've done earlier in their life and the experiences they've had and all that sort of thing. But when starting a new work, without a doubt, the inspiration is going to be the substance of that actual work. So I know it sounds like a cop-out answer, but if someone says, where did you get the inspiration for Journey? The answer is from Journey, because I played the game constantly, talked to the team, play tested, gave feedback, was part of the process. And that's ultimately where the music comes from. And so it doesn't matter what game we're talking about, big, small, or if a film or anything like that, it's always that way. So I know it doesn't sound that interesting, and it's not some like divine hidden temple in the mountains or something like that. It's really just the task at hand. You let the game talk to you and tell you what it wants. Which composers have influenced your career? So my hero of heroes is a composer named Jerry Goldsmith, who did an enormous number of film and television work for basically the entire second half of the 20th century. And the reason Jerry was such a big influence on me was because he approached things with the freshness as if he were composing for the first time in his life. So he didn't take for granted that he knew how to construct, love scenes and chase scenes and action scenes and all the rest of it. He did a million movies that had those kinds of scenes, and yet he always brought something new to it. He always pushed himself to dig deeper. He himself would say that he never really wanted to repeat himself. He would write a piece of music and then set it aside and say, okay, how do I do something new? That had a profound impact on me. In the game side, when I, growing up as a gamer, I was diehard into the LucasArts adventure games, and my ultimate hero is a composer named Peter McConnell, who is still working today. He's still an active composer. He wrote the music for Hearthstone, but he did, worked on games at LucasArts like Monkey Island, The Dig, Full Throttle, and then of course my favorite of all time, Grim Fandango. So just growing up with a massive love of Pete McConnell's music, and then the philosophy of Jerry Goldsmith, that's my answer. That's who influenced me. What is the difference between composing music for games versus other media? Are indie games like Journey any different from big franchises like Assassin's Creed? Okay, so that's two questions baked into one. It's impossible to give a good answer that's not like 2 hours long about the difference between scoring films and games, but in general, they share in common the most important thing, which is the idea of good storytelling. In creating a game score, you are crafting music to accompany an interactive experience that ultimately is going to be some form of a narrative. And obviously there's exceptions to that. Tetris doesn't have a plot. But by and large, we are talking about narrative experiences. And so are films. And so the nuts and bolts of just how you tell a story is going to be the same in each medium. Now, the thing that makes them different is of massive significance, though, because what makes them different is the fact that games are interactive in films and actually every other medium, whether we're talking about theater or opera or whatever, they are not interactive. And that dynamic quality is impossible to overstate the magnitude of. So, for example, you play a game like Journey, and the player crests over a sand dune, and the music knows that they're doing that, and it changes based on that physical action, and seamlessly will transition to something designed to accompany the environment awaiting for them on the other side of that sand dune. Add to that the fact that there's things like the system is actively asking, are you connected to the PlayStation Network? And are you connected to another player? And how far away are you from that player? And it's actively remixing the music based on all those variables too. Film has no equivalent to any of that. You sit down, you have your popcorn, and you watch the movie, and then it's over. And it's a passive experience. It's never going to not be that film. But games vary from one playthrough to another. So that, it's like an incredibly short, unsatisfying answer, but that's basically the biggest difference. As for the second half of this, about the difference between indie games versus bigger games like Assassin's Creed, in my experience, they're really not that different, insofar as every game is so different that it's impossible to lump them together. I've worked on like a game I did called Monaco, or a game like the Banner Saga, were tiny teams. Journey was a developer studio of about a dozen people, and then the full infrastructure of the Sony music department, which is much more like a AAA production. And then obviously Assassin's Creed was the same basic setup, except just tons more people. So in my mind, there isn't a big difference because they're always different. It's a crappy answer. But they are so impossible to generalize about. I mean, I've worked on games like a game called Sunset, which was made by a husband-wife team in Belgium, where it's just, in terms of the score, it's just the three of us talking. And then on Assassin's Creed, even though the team was so gigantic, I really worked primarily with the audio director at Ubisoft's Quebec City office, named Lydia Andrew, and so in a way, that game felt very one-on-one, or one-on-two with her music supervisor, an amazing Canadian musician named Christian. And so, in a certain respect, the team on Assassin's Creed was smaller than the team on Journey, because of who I was interacting with. So, anyway, that answer is terrible because it's not like, oh, there's this, there's this, there's this, there's this. Every game is so different, you just never know what you're going to find. Is there a particular franchise you'd like to compose for, other than the ones you've worked on? What are the most memorable ones you've listened to? I love how that's qualified, like my automatic answer is going to be, well, obviously my music is the most memorable music. I would never say that. A particular franchise I would like to work on. People ask me that a lot, and I think, honestly, not really any franchise is something that I would be dying to be part of. Unless there's a way for me to kind of be myself in that franchise. So like Assassin's Creed was a really good example of that, where they wanted to mix it up and change how the game sounded, and so I dove in and brought something that I thought would be interesting, and which was pretty different from the previous ACs, and they were into that. But I've had discussions with other franchises where I made similar suggestions, and they said, no, we want to stick with the setup as we have it, and so we didn't end up working together. So it's one of those kind of conundrums. Like, people ask me, what's your favorite game ever that you would have loved to have worked on? And I say, well, like BioShock is one of my favorite games of all time. BioShock and BioShock Infinite. But part of why I love those games is my friend Gary Scheinman's music. So it's not a dream job for me to have scored BioShock, because it would actually make the game less than it is to get rid of Gary's music and for me to put my own in there. So it's like in some mythical alternate universe where there was no Gary Scheinman and I scored BioShock, I suppose that would be a good project to have worked on. But when asked, like, would you love to rescore Star Wars or something like that? Or I always say, no, I love it because of its music, or at least that's a big part of why I love it. So honestly, the answer is no. I'm really grateful to have worked on so many games that when they showed up, I thought, I've never played a game like this. Flow, Monaco, Journey, Banner Saga, Abzû, these are all games, Sunset, these are games where as soon as I played them, they felt unique, and I thought, this is a great playground for me to try to create, hopefully, unique music. When you're stepping into an existing franchise, there's obviously going to be a lot of blueprints that you have to stick with, and that's not quite as fun. If the Call of Duty folks call tomorrow, we'll have a conversation. So I'm not saying I'm opposed to anything, but generally I really love that I've worked on so many games that are totally new IPs and just a blank slate that I get to do whatever I want with. Advice for young musicians who are looking for careers. This one also could be an hour on its own, but the shortest answer that I like to give is don't be afraid to be divisive. And what I mean by that is when we're at the beginning of our career and we don't have any credits to our name, we don't have any money, we don't have any jobs to speak of, we go into a naturally defensive mode of wanting to please everybody around us. Somebody says, do you know how to write, dubstep polka music? And you're like, yes, I do. And you just put yourself out there relentlessly. And I think that even though that's the instinct, guard against that. Don't be afraid to say, you know what, I don't like that, and be prepared for them to not hire you as a result. Because what happens is when you throw down a strong opinion and you really project, like, I have an artistic vision, then the people that gravitate towards that are going to see clearly through the crowd at you. And the people that are not interested will also see through the crowd and know that they're not interested. And then they'll look for somebody else. And that's actually a good thing. If someone's not going to gel with you, it's better for everybody involved that you know that in advance. And so the way I like to put it is walk through life as a giant, bright, neon sign version of you that a mile away anybody could spot and either consciously go towards or consciously avoid. And that's what being divisive is all about. It's not your instinct. Everything in your body will be telling you, don't do this, this is terrifying, this is a horrible idea, I'm not going to get this job, my life is over. But the moment I started doing that, I started to get traction in my career, and I think that's a big part of the reason why. So hopefully that helps. I hope this was interesting, and thank you for asking me to do it. Hi from Los Angeles.